The Pan-Galactic Cultural Exchange and Defense Academy was a place of wonder. Its halls were filled with beings from 1,000 different stars. Some were tall and thin, with skin like shimmering silk. Others were short and broad, with limbs as thick as trees. They talked in clicks, hums, and deep rumbling voices. They learned about starships and diplomacy and history together. In a large, circular room with soft, glowing walls, a different kind of lesson was happening. This was the close-quarters combat training hall. The floor was a firm, springy material that felt soft underfoot but provided good grip. A group of 20 students stood in neat rows. They were watching their instructor. A being named Kale. Kale was from a species called the Valerians. He was very tall, over 7 feet. His body was covered in smooth, dark gray plates that looked like polished stone. They protected him like a suit of natural armor. He had 4 strong arms, and his face was long, with 2 large, dark eyes that seemed to see everything at once. He moved with a quiet, powerful grace. When he spoke, his voice was deep and clear, and it filled the room without him needing to raise it. "Control," Kyle said, his eyes moving slowly across the faces of his students. "Control is the heart of all combat. Control of your body, control of your mind, control of your opponent." He pointed to a large student from a heavy gravity world. The student named Boral stepped forward. Boral was big. His skin was thick and leathery, and a single sharp horn grew from the center of his forehead. He looked like he could run through a wall. Kale moved fast. It was a blur of gray. One moment Boral was standing. The next, Kale had used 2 of his arms to trap Boral's limb and another to apply pressure to a joint on his back. Boral let out a grunt and was forced down to one knee. He was not hurt, but he could not move. "The objective," Kale said, releasing him and helping him up, "is to stop the threat, not to destroy it. In a crowded street, on a starliner, in a market, your goal is to end the fight quickly and safely, for you and for them." He looked at the class, his face serious. "This is why we have one rule. The most important rule you will learn here. There are to be no kill moves in this class. No strikes to the throat. No blows to the back of the skull. No techniques designed to permanently injure or end a life. You are here to learn restraint. Is that understood?" A chorus of strange sounds answered him. Chitters and rumbles and deep hums of agreement. The students understood. This was civilized. This was proper. In the back row stood 3 students who were quieter than the rest. They were the humans. They were new to the academy, and many of the other species found them puzzling. They had no natural armor, just soft skin. They had no claws or fangs. They were not particularly strong or fast compared to many of the species here. Their names were Ji-hun, Chul, and Su-min. Ji-hun was calm and watchful. His dark eyes took in everything. He stood very still, his arms relaxed at his sides. He was thinking about the angles of Kale's throw, the distribution of his weight. Next to him, Chul had a different energy. He was restless. A small smile played on his lips as Kale demonstrated the hold. He was imagining how he might counter it, how to twist out of the lock. He liked the challenge. Then there was Su-min. She stood straight, her expression neutral. She listened to Kale's words with intense focus. When he said no kill moves, her eyebrows furrowed just a little. It was not a look of disagreement, but one of deep thought. She was turning the words over in her mind, examining them from all sides. Kale's eyes passed over the 3 humans. Their silence stood out. The others were eager, asking questions about the specific hand placement for the lock. The humans just watched. He found it unsettling. "Su-min," Kale's voice cut through the murmur. The class went quiet. All eyes turned to the human girl. "You have been very quiet. Do you understand the rule?" Su-min looked up, her face clear. "Yes, Trainer Kale. I understand the rule." Kale waited. He sensed there was more. "But," Su-min lifted her hand, a simple, polite gesture. "I just have a question for clarification." "Proceed," Kyle said. "The rule," Su-min said, her voice even and practical. "When you say no kill moves, does that apply only to unarmed techniques? Or does the rule also include the use of improvised weapons?" The room became utterly silent. The soft hum of the air recyclers seemed loud. A few of the aliens glanced at each other. One of the insectoid students made a nervous clicking sound with its mandibles. Improvised weapons? What did that mean? A weapon was a weapon. You carried it or you did not. The idea of improvising one was strange. Trainer Kale was completely still. His chitinous plates did not move. His many-jointed fingers were frozen at his sides. He stared at Sumin, trying to understand the mind that would ask such a question. He had expected a question about the rules of a tournament or the ethics of force. Not this, finally he spoke, his voice colder than before. Improvised weapons? The rule applies to all techniques taught in this class. The very concept of an improvised weapon in a controlled environment is aberrant. He used a word that meant unnatural, wrong, outside of normal behavior. Sumin simply nodded. She pulled out a small datapad and made a quick note, as if he had just clarified a minor point about the lesson schedule. Thank you, trainer, she said. That answers my question. From beside her, Ji-hoon let out a breath so quiet only Chul heard it. He closed his eyes for a brief second. Chol, on the other hand, bit the inside of his cheek to stop himself from grinning. He looked down at the floor to hide his expression. Kale continued to stare at Sumin for a long moment. He then turned sharply back to the class. Again, he commanded, his voice hard, pair up. Practice the neutralization hold, slowly, with control. The class broke into pairs. The noise level rose again as students began to practice. But the mood had shifted. A new unspoken tension was in the air. Ji-hoon and Chol paired up. As they took hold of each other's arms, Chol whispered, Improvised weapons? Really, Sumin? You had to ask that? Sumin, who was paired with a nervous plant-like being, looked over at them. It was a logical question, she said, her voice low. The parameters were unclear. Logical? Ji-hoon said, applying a gentle pressure to Chul's arm. He thinks we're barbarians now. We are, Chul grunted, twisting out of the hold. Or at least that's what they're all afraid of. Didn't you see their faces? Sumin turned back to her partner, carefully helping the alien place its vine-like appendages in the correct position. I saw confusion, she said simply. They do not think the way we do. Across the room, Kale watched the humans as he moved between the other pairs. He corrected a grip here, a stance there. But his mind was on Sumin's question. It revealed a way of thinking that was entirely foreign to him. For a Valyrian, combat was a dance of strength and skill bound by strict rules of honor. Your body was your weapon. The environment was the stage. The idea of picking up a piece of the stage to use as a weapon was dishonorable. It was cheating. Yet the human girl had not asked with malice or pride. She had asked with the calm tone of someone seeking information. As if it were the most normal question in the world, the class ended and the students began to file out. Kale's voice stopped the three humans before they reached the door. Ji-hoon, Chul, Sumin, a word in my office. Now. The other students gave them a wide berth as they left. The humans exchanged looks. Ji-hoon's face was resigned. Chul's was set in a stubborn line. Sumin's was, as always, neutral. They turned and followed the tall, gray figure of their trainer out of the hall, leaving the soft, glowing room behind. The first lesson was over, but a much more difficult one was about to begin. The walk to Trainer Kale's office was silent. The hallway floors were made of a cool, polished material that reflected the soft blue light from the ceiling. Ji-hoon walked with his hands in his pockets, his face calm, but his mind working quickly. Chul walked with his shoulders back, a slight frown on his face. Sumin walked between them, her posture straight, her eyes looking ahead as if she were simply going to another class. Kale's office was not what they expected. It was not a warrior's den. It was neat and orderly. A large window looked out onto a garden with strange glowing plants from different worlds. There were no weapons on the walls. Instead, there were small sculptures and data crystals arranged on shelves. A single large plant with silver leaves sat in one corner. Kale walked behind his desk and stood, not inviting them to sit. He placed his 4 hands on the smooth surface of the desk. He looked at each of them in turn. His dark eyes were hard to read, but the set of his jaw was stern. Your question, trainee. Sumin, he began, his voice low and even. It was not a simple request for clarification. It revealed a mindset. A dangerous one. Sumin opened her mouth to speak, but Ji-hoon gave a tiny, almost invisible shake of his head. She closed it. Kale continued. This class is about discipline. It is about honor. It is about learning to use your body as a precise tool. Your question was about creative brutality. Why? Why would your first thought upon hearing the most basic rule of civilized defense B to ask about using objects as weapons. He was genuinely trying to understand. To him, it was like a music student asking if they were allowed to break the violin over the teacher's head. It was a complete misunderstanding of the entire purpose. Chul could not stay quiet any longer. It's not about brutality, trainer. It's about winning. Kyle's gaze shifted to him. Winning? This is not a game, trainee Chul. This is about control, neutralizing a threat with minimal force. That's what I mean, Chul said, his voice gaining an edge. The most minimal force is the force that ends the fight the fastest. If that means using what's around you, then you use it. Kale's top set of arms unfolded, and he gestured to the peaceful room around them. And what is here to use, trainee Chul? My desk? This plant? A data crystal? The idea is absurd. It is dishonorable. It is the thinking of a cornered animal. Ji-hoon finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but firm. With respect, Trainer Kale, that is exactly what we are. The room went quiet. Kyle looked at Ji-hoon, waiting for him to explain. Your species, Ji-hoon said. The Valerians. You evolved as predators, did you not? You have natural armor. You have 4 strong limbs. You are by nature strong. Kyle gave a single slow nod. This is true. It is why we value discipline so highly. To temper our strength with control. Ji-hoon nodded as well. A noble goal. But my species did not evolve that way. We were not the hunters at the top. For a very, very long time, we were the hunted. We are soft. We are slow compared to many of the predators that chased us. We have no claws, no thick hide. He took a small step forward. Our only advantage was here. He tapped the side of his head. We learned that a sharp stone was better than a fist. A long, heavy branch could keep a predator farther away than a kick. We learned to look at the world not just as a place but as a toolbox. A riverbank was not just a place to drink. It was a source of sharp rocks. A forest was not just a place to hide. It was a source of clubs and spears. Suman saw that Kale was listening, even if he did not agree. She added her voice, her tone practical, like an engineer explaining a machine. It is a simple calculation of physics, trainer. The human body has limits. The force of a punch is X. The force of a punch while holding a hard, dense object is X multiplied by Y. It is inefficient not to use available tools to increase your effectiveness. It is not about honor or dishonor. It is about math. It is about survival. Kyle was silent for a long time. He looked from Ji-hoon's calm logic to Suman's cold practicality to Chul's fiery conviction. He saw that for them, this was not a strange idea. It was a fundamental truth. It was the story of their entire history. It is a philosophy of weakness, Kyle said finally. But his voice was less certain now. It was not an insult, but an observation. It is the philosophy of the weak who refused to die out, Ji-hoon corrected gently. It is how we became the ones who walk among the stars. We never forgot that the world is full of weapons. You just have to see them. Kale straightened up. He had made a decision. He could not let this thinking go unchecked. It was a poison in his orderly classroom. I see that your basic understanding of combat ethics is underdeveloped, he said. Your question was not born of malice but of a lack of foundation. Therefore, the 3 of you will attend a remedial session. Combat Ethics 101, The Purpose of Restraint. It is a class for first-year cadets, but I believe you need it. Chul's face flushed with anger. A remedial class? For asking a question? For demonstrating a fundamental lack of understanding, Kyle replied, his voice firm again. You will report to Lecture Hall 7 tomorrow at 0800. You are dismissed. The 3 humans turned and left the office. The door slid shut behind them with a soft hiss. Once they were in the hallway, Chul exploded. A remedial class! He thinks we're children, or savages. He is trying to teach us his way, Ji-hoon said, starting to walk back towards their quarters. He does not understand ours. So we just sit there and listen to some lecture about honor while drawing pictures with crayons? Chul snapped. Sumin, who had been quiet, spoke. The lecture will be informative. Informative? Chul laughed, a short, harsh sound. How? It will teach us how they think, she said. If we understand how they think, we can better explain how we think. Or, we can predict how they will act in a fight. Knowledge is a tool. This lecture is a tool. Ji-hoon looked at Sumin with a faint smile. You see, you are doing it again. You are taking something he meant as a punishment and turning it into a resource. Sumin nodded. It is the logical thing to do. They walked on. The other students in the halls gave them curious looks. The story of Sumin's question had already spread. They were the humans who thought about fighting with furniture. They were the ones who had been called to the trainer's office. Later that evening, in their common room, Ji-hoon tried to explain it to Chul, who was still fuming. Look at it from his side, Chul, Ji-hoon said. His entire life, combat has been one thing. A straight line. Strength against strength, skill against skill. We come in and show him a squiggly line. We talk about using the dirt, the darkness, a piece of rope. It breaks his brain a little. I don't care if it breaks his brain, Chul muttered, staring at the wall. We shouldn't be punished for it. We are not being punished, Sumin said from where she was reading on a datapad. We are being re-educated. There is a difference. One is a penalty. The other is an attempt to correct a perceived error. It feels the same, Chul said. The feeling is irrelevant, Sumin replied, not looking up from her screen. Ji-hoon sighed. He knew that tomorrow's class would be difficult. It was not just about sitting through a boring lecture. It was about having their very way of thinking challenged. Kyle believed he was teaching them to be civilized. He believed he was sanding off their rough, dangerous edges. But Ji-hoon knew that those edges were not rough. They were sharp. And they were sharp for a reason. They had kept humanity alive through countless winters and countless predators. You could not sand down a razor blade and expect it to still cut. He looked out the window of their common room at the alien stars. Out there in the vast darkness were there things that were like the old predators of Earth, things that did not care about honor or rules, things that only understood force. He thought there were. And when they met them, he knew which philosophy would keep them alive. It would not be the straight line of honorable combat. It would be the squiggly, unpredictable, and utterly pragmatic line of the human mind. The mind that saw a weapon in everything. The next morning, at 0750, the three humans stood outside Lecture Hall 7. It was a small, plain room. Inside, a few young cadets from other species were already sitting down. They looked very young. Chul took a deep breath, his pride still wounded. Let's just get this over with. They walked in and took their seats in the back. The other cadets stared at them, whispering. The famous humans were in their remedial class. The instructor was a small, bird-like being who spoke very quickly about the history of non-lethal combat in galactic law. It was very dry. Chul slumped in his chair, bored and angry. Ji-hoon listened politely, taking notes on the Valerian perspective. Sumin listened the most intently of all. She was not listening to learn the rules. She was listening to learn the weaknesses in the rules. She was looking for the gaps, the places where the strict line of Valerian honor would break when faced with the messy, unpredictable squiggle of a real fight. She was, in her own way, looking for improvised weapons in the lesson itself. The remedial ethics class was as dull as Chul had feared. The instructor, a small fluttering being named Professor Click, spent the hour talking about interstellar conflict resolution treaties and the philosophical underpinnings of proportional force. Chul spent the time drawing small, detailed pictures of starships in the margins of his datapad. Ji-hoon took neat, orderly notes. Sumin stared straight ahead, her face blank, processing every word and filing it away. When they returned to the main combat training hall, the atmosphere had changed. The other trainees looked at them differently. There were more sidelong glances, more whispered conversations that stopped when they got near. They were the ones who had been sent to the little kids' class. They were marked. Trainer Kyle began the lesson as if nothing had happened. Today we move to practical simulations. You will apply the holds and throws you have learned in a dynamic environment. The goal remains the same: control and neutralize. Not destroy. He divided them into groups. The training hall had several large padded areas that could be programmed with simple holographic obstacles: low walls, corridors, mock consoles. The lights dimmed slightly, and a soft blue grid appeared on the floor of one of the areas. First scenario, Kyle announced: defending a position against a single aggressive opponent. The objective is to prevent the opponent from touching the console behind you for 60 seconds. You may only use the techniques we have practiced. No striking. He called 2 names. Trainee Boral, you are the aggressor. Trainee Ji-hun, you are the defender. A murmur went through the class. Boral grinned, a wide, unpleasant sight. He cracked the thick knuckles on his large hands. Ji-hun simply nodded and walked to the center of the padded area. A low, glowing console appeared behind him. The simulation began. Boral charged. He was surprisingly fast for his size, a bull-like rush of muscle and intent. Ji-hun did not meet the charge. He sidestepped, using Boral's own momentum against him. As Boral passed, Ji-hun hooked his leg and shoved, sending the big alien stumbling past the console. Boral recovered, his grin gone, replaced by a scowl. He turned and came again, slower this time, his arms wide to grab. Ji-hun moved like water. He deflected the grabs, used wrist locks to turn Boral's strength against him, and once spun the large alien completely around, making him look clumsy and slow. Ji-hun never struck him. He just redirected, controlled, and neutralized. The 60-second timer ended with Ji-hun standing calmly by the console, and Boral breathing heavily, his face dark with frustration. Acceptable, Kale said, his voice giving no praise. Control was maintained. Trainee Ji-hun used his opponent's energy. That is the correct way. Ji-hun walked back to his place. Chul gave him a slight nod. Sumin's expression was unreadable. Next pair, Kale called. Trainee Chul, defender, Trainee Boral, aggressor again. Boral's scowl deepened. He did not like being made to look foolish. He wanted to smash something. Chul took his position, a confident look on his face. He was ready for the big oaf. The simulation started. Boral did not charge wildly this time. He advanced carefully, his body low. Chul waited. When Boral lunged, Chul was ready. He caught the alien's arm, twisted, and tried to execute a perfect hip throw. But Boral was too heavy, his balance too solid. The throw failed. Boral grunted and wrapped his thick arms around Chul, lifting him off the ground in a crushing bear hug. Chul gasped, the air forced from his lungs. He could not breathe. The hold was not part of the simulation. It was just raw, angry strength. Enough! Kale's voice cut through the air. The hold is secured, Boral. Release him. But Boral did not release him. His competitive fury, his anger from being bested by Ji-hun took over. He squeezed harder. Chul's face began to turn red. His hands scrabbled uselessly against Boral's rock-hard back. Boral! Stand down! Kale shouted, starting to move forward. But Kale was too far away. From the sidelines, Ji-hun took a step forward, his body tensing. But before he could move, another figure was already in motion. Sumin had been standing near the edge of the simulation area, close to a real, non-holographic maintenance panel on the wall. The panel was open, revealing a tangle of colorful, high-tensile data cables and power conduits. She did not run. She did not shout. Her movement was fast, direct, and utterly without hesitation. As Boral squeezed the breath from Chul, Sumin's eyes were not on Boral's face. They were on his limbs, his posture, the physics of the problem. He was a large, heavy object applying force in a specific direction. She needed to redirect that force. She did not try to punch or kick him. Her bare hands would be useless against his thick hide. Instead, she reached into the open panel and grabbed a thick orange data cable. It was as thick as her thumb, made of a strong, flexible polymer. In one fluid, continuous motion, she looped the end of the cable around Boral's massive forearm, the one that was locked across Chul's chest. Boral, focused on crushing Chul, barely noticed the touch. Then, Sumin planted her feet, leaned back, and pulled. It was not a powerful pull. A human could not outmuscle Boral, but she did not need to. She was not trying to pull him over. She was changing his balance. The cable acted as a lever, a sudden, unexpected point of pressure on his arm. Boral, caught by surprise, instinctively resisted the pull. He shifted his weight to counter it. In doing so, His crushing grip on Chul loosened for a fraction of a second. It was enough. Chul gasped in a desperate breath. At the same moment, Ji-hun arrived. He did not try to grapple Boral. He saw the situation with perfect clarity. He saw the cable in Sumin's hands, the shift in Boral's balance. He saw the opening. He did not use a class-approved hold. He drove his foot hard into the side of Boral's back knee. It was not a kill move. It was not meant to break the joint. But it was a move of pure, painful biomechanical exploitation. The knee was a weak point, regardless of species. Boral let out a roar of pain and surprise as his leg buckled. His grip on Chul fell completely apart. Chul dropped to the floor, coughing and clutching his chest. Boral, off balance from Sumin's pull and the blow to his knee, stumbled forward. He did not fall gracefully. He crashed heavily into the padded wall. The orange cable still wrapped around his arm and lay there for a moment, stunned and tangled. The entire sequence had taken less than 5 seconds. The training hall was silent. The only sounds were Chul's ragged breathing and Boral's low groans of pain and anger. The other students stared, their mouths open. They had not seen a fight. They had seen something else. Something efficient and terrifying. It was like watching a machine solve a problem. Trainer Kale stood frozen in the middle of the room. His eyes went from Chul on the floor to Boral slumped against the wall, to the data cable still held loosely in Sumin's hand. His face, usually so stern and controlled, was a mask of shock and fury. He strode over to Boral first. "Medic!" He barked into his wristcom. He examined Boral's knee. It was already swelling. It was a bad hyperextension, a painful injury that would take days to heal. Then he turned to the humans. His gaze burned into Ji-hun. "You were explicitly told. No disabling strikes." He then turned his fury on Sumin, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And you used an improvised weapon." Sumin let the cable drop. It slithered to the floor like a dead snake. Her face was still calm. "You also told us the objective was to neutralize a threat," she said, her voice even. "Trainee Boral was about to crush Chul's ribs, maybe his spine. My options were limited. A joint lock would not have stopped 200 kilos of momentum. A data cable would. It was the most efficient tool available to achieve the stated objective, neutralize the threat without killing." Ji-hun, standing protectively near Chul, added, "He was not responding to your command, trainer. He was going to cause serious harm. I targeted a non-lethal pressure point to break his concentration and end the hold." "Non-lethal?" Kale gestured violently at Boral, who was being helped onto a floating stretcher by a medical drone. "He cannot walk. He will recover," Ji-hun said quietly. Chul might not have. Kale looked at the three of them. He saw Sumin's cold logic. He saw Ji-hun's calm defense. He saw Chul still pale and breathing hard on the floor. He saw the other students watching this entire drama, their belief in the neat, orderly world of Valyrian combat shattered. He had seen it himself. The speed, the coordination, the utter lack of anger. It was not a fight. It was a calculation. They had assessed the problem and applied a solution with brutal surgical precision. "All of you," Kyle said, his voice tight with controlled rage, "to my office. Now." He turned to the rest of the class. "Training is dismissed for the day." The other students filed out quickly, not making a sound. They cast wide-eyed looks back at the humans. Ji-hun helped Chul to his feet. Sumin stood waiting, her hands now empty. Together they followed the stiff, angry back of Trainer Kale out of the hall. The padded floor, the holographic console, the dropped data cable, all were silent witnesses to the moment the humans had stopped talking about their philosophy and had decided to demonstrate it. The walk to Kale's office felt longer this time. The silence was heavier. Chul walked slowly, one arm wrapped around his ribs. Each breath was a small, sharp pain. Ji-hun stayed close to him, a steadying presence. Sumin walked a step behind, her face still calm, but her mind was replaying the last few seconds, checking her actions for any flaw in logic. Kale did not go behind his desk this time. He stood in the middle of the room, his forearms clasped behind his back. The door slid shut, sealing them in. The peaceful garden outside the window seemed a world away. He did not shout. His voice was low and cold like stone. "Explain yourselves." He looked at Ji-hun. A strike to a major joint. A clearly disabling blow. His eyes shifted to Sumin. the use of Academy property as a weapon. You were given a direct order after your last question. You were told the rule applied to all techniques. You disobeyed. Ji-hun spoke first. Trainer, with respect, we were also told that the goal was to neutralize a threat. Trainee Boral was no longer in a training exercise. He was in a rage. He was ignoring your command. He was causing real injury. So you decided to cause a different, more severe injury? Kale's voice was sharp. It was a calculated response, Ji-hun said. The pain was immediate and shocking. It broke his focus. It made him release Chol. The injury to his knee is temporary. The injury to Chol's chest or spine could have been permanent. Kyle turned his hard gaze to Su-min. And you? A data cable? Was that also a calculated response? Su-min met his eyes without flinching. Yes, it was a lever. I could not match his strength. But I could use physics against him. The cable allowed me to apply force at a distance and change his balance. It was the safest option. Safest. Kale's voice rose for the first time. You pulled a high-tensile cable from a live console. You could have caused a power surge. You could have damaged critical systems. The risk was minimal, Su-min replied, her tone factual. I identified it as a data conduit, not a primary power line. The orange coloring confirms this. The chance of a surge was less than 1%. The chance of Boral seriously injuring Chol was 100%. I chose the option with the better probability. Kale stared at her. She was talking about probabilities and cable colors while he was talking about rules and discipline. They were speaking different languages. Chol finally spoke, his voice raspy. He wasn't going to stop, Trainer. You saw him. He was going to hurt me. They stopped him. He coughed, wincing. They saved me from a hospital bed. Or worse, Kale was silent. He paced away from them, looking out at the garden. He had seen it. He knew Boral had lost control. He knew his command had been ignored. But the solution the humans had applied was so alien, so outside the framework of everything he believed. He turned back to them. What you did was not combat. It was not the art of control we teach. It was a violation of the principle. Ji-hun took a slow breath. He knew this was the core of the problem. Trainer Kale, he said softly. May I ask you a question? Kale gave a short, sharp nod. You believe in honor. In facing your opponent directly. In using your own body, your own skill. This is a noble belief, but it is a belief that comes from a position of strength. Your species has always been strong. He stepped forward, his eyes earnest. What is the honorable way for a rabbit to fight a wolf? Should the rabbit face the wolf directly? Should it try to use a fancy kick? No, the rabbit runs, it hides. It bites only if it is cornered. It uses the terrain. It uses its small size. It does whatever it must to survive. There is no honor in survival. There is only survival. He gestured to Su-min. Her question about improvised weapons was not about brutality. It was the rabbit asking if it is allowed to use its teeth. It was the most basic question of our existence, Su-min nodded. For us, everything is a potential tool. A rock, a stick, a cable. Because for most of our history, our bodies were not enough. We look at the world and we see not what things are, but what they can do. A chair is for sitting. But it is also a barrier. It is also a weight. It is also something to throw. This is how we think. It is not a choice. It is our nature. Kale listened. He looked at Chul, still in pain. He thought of Boral, his leg injured because he had broken the rules of the game. But the humans had not been playing a game. They had been solving a problem. A problem Boral had created. He thought about the rabbit and the wolf. The concept was foreign to him. A Valyrian was never the rabbit. They were always the wolf. You fight from a position of inherent strength, Ji-hun repeated softly. We do not. Every one of our ancient combat forms at its core is not about how to fight. It is about how a weaker, slower, softer being can survive an encounter with a stronger, faster, harder one. That is the seed from which all our fighting grows. That is why our first question is always, what can I use? Because for us, our bare hands were never enough. The truth of it settled in the room. It was not an excuse. It was an explanation. It was the story of a species that had clawed its way up from the bottom. They had not forgotten the lessons of the bottom. They had built their entire philosophy on them. Kyle looked at the three humans. He saw not disobedient students, but representatives of a history he could barely imagine. A history of fear, of desperation, of using wit and will to overcome impossible odds. Their improvised weapons were not a cheat. They were the legacy of 1,000 generations of survivors. He walked slowly to his desk and sat down. The anger was gone from his face, replaced by a deep, thoughtful fatigue. "Your actions, while effective, broke the rules of my classroom," he said, his voice quiet. "There must be consequences for that. You will be confined to your quarters for 48 hours. You will reflect on the importance of following orders even when you disagree with them." It was a light punishment. They all knew it, but, Kale continued, looking at each of them, "I understand now. I understand that your way is not born of disrespect. It is born of a different history, a different truth." He dismissed them with a wave of his hand. "Go, report to the medical bay, Chul. Have your ribs checked." The three humans turned and left. The door closed behind them. In the quiet of his office, Kale did not move. He stared at the silver-leaved plant in the corner. He imagined a universe where his people had been the rabbits, not the wolves. What would their combat look like? Would it be full of tricks and traps and clever uses of the environment? Would the first rule of their class be use anything you can find? He did not know. But he was beginning to understand that the galaxy was a much bigger and more dangerous place than he had thought. And in that galaxy, the philosophy of the weak, the philosophy of the survivor, might be just as important as the philosophy of the strong. He thought about the data cable on the floor. He thought about the precise, efficient way Su-min had used it. It was not pretty. It was not honorable. But it had worked, and in the silence a new, unsettling question began to form in Trainer Kale's mind. In a real fight outside these safe walls, which was more important, to be honorable or to be effective? For the first time in his life, he was not sure of the answer. The 2 days in their quarters passed quietly. Chul's ribs were bruised but not broken. He spent most of the time resting. Ji-hun read. Su-min studied advanced physics. They did not talk much about what had happened. There was nothing more to say. When they returned to the training hall, they expected more silence, more cold stares. They expected to be outsiders. They were wrong. The other students did not look at them with anger or fear. They looked at them with a new kind of respect. A cautious, curious respect. The story of what they had done to Boral had spread. They were not the strange humans anymore. They were the humans who had taken down a charging Boral in 5 seconds. Trainer Kale stood at the front of the room. He watched them enter. His face was neutral, but the hard anger from before was gone. "Take your places," he said. His voice was calm. The class formed their rows. Everyone was quiet, waiting. Kale did not begin with a lesson on holds or throws. He began by talking. "For generations," he said, his voice carrying easily through the hall, "this class has taught one philosophy of combat. It is a good philosophy. It is built on control, discipline, and honor. I believe in it." He paused, his eyes moving over the students. "But we were wrong to believe it was the only one." A soft murmur went through the class. They looked at each other in confusion. Kyle continued. "We believed that using anything other than your own body was dishonorable. We called it cheating. We thought it was a sign of a weak mind." He looked directly at the three humans. "We were wrong. It is not a sign of a weak mind. It is the product of a different kind of strength. A strength of will, a strength of imagination." He walked to the side of the training hall. He pressed a control on the wall. A section of the smooth padded floor slid away. Underneath was a new area. It was not a clean, open space. It was a mock environment. There were low, fake walls made of a soft material. There were overturned containers that looked like cargo crates. There were dummy consoles with loose wires and cables hanging from them. It looked messy and chaotic. "This," Kale announced, "is a new training module. We will call it environmental utilization, but the humans have a better name for it. They call it making do." Every eye in the room was wide with surprise. They looked from the strange new area to Kale, and then to the humans. "The rule of this class remains," Kale said firmly. "No kill moves, and that has not changed. But our understanding of what a move is has expanded." He turned to Ji-hun, Su-min, and Chul. "Trainees, step forward." The three humans walked to the front of the class. They stood beside Kyle. "These 3 students broke the rules of my class," Kyle said to everyone. "They did it to save one of their own from serious harm. In doing so, they showed me that my teaching was incomplete. I was preparing you for a fight in a clean room, not for survival in a messy universe." He gestured to the new training area. "This module was designed by trainees Ji-hun, Su-min, and Chul. They will help me teach it." Ji-hun felt a wave of shock. He looked at Kale. The Valerian's face was serious, but there was a new light in his eyes. It was not anger, it was acceptance. Chul stood a little straighter, the pain in his ribs forgotten. A slow grin spread across his face. Sumin simply nodded as if this was a logical next step. The goal is not to kill, Kale explained to the class. The goal is to see. To look at a pipe not as part of a wall, but as a lever. To see a cable not as a data line, but as a way to trip or bind. To see a crate not as an object, but as cover. He looked at the other aliens, who still looked confused. You will learn how a weaker being can use the environment to balance the scales against a stronger one. This is not about dishonor. This is about survival, and survival is the first duty of any soldier or peacekeeper. He turned to the humans. Ji-hun, would you demonstrate? Ji-hun walked into the new training area. He looked around. He pointed to a low, soft wall. If someone is chasing you, you can jump over this. But you can also push it over behind you. It won't hurt them, but it will slow them down. It creates space. He demonstrated, tipping the light wall over. He then walked to a dummy console with loose wires. He picked up a thick insulated cable. This is flexible. It is strong. You can use it to pull something. Or, he said, looping it quickly around a post, you can use it to block a path. You can guide your opponent where you want them to go. Sumin stepped forward next. She stood by a stack of soft cargo crates. These are not weapons, she said, but they are obstacles. You can put them between you and an opponent. You can break their line of sight. If you are being chased, you can knock them over. The chaos is your friend, she then pointed to the floor. The floor is firm, but if you can make your opponent fall, the floor becomes a weapon, not to kill but to stun. A fall onto a hard surface is a powerful neutralizer. Chul went last. He was still moving carefully, but his eyes were bright. He stood in the middle of the area. It's not about any one thing, he said. It's about putting it all together. It's about not just fighting your opponent. It's about fighting the whole room. You use the walls, the floor, the ceiling. You use everything. You make the room itself your partner. The other students listened, fascinated. They began to see the messy area not as a jumble of junk, but as a playground of possibilities. The straight line of Valerian combat was being redrawn into a complex, unpredictable web. For the rest of the class, Kale and the humans helped the other students. They showed a slender insectoid student how to use its small size to hide behind obstacles and create surprises. They showed a heavy, slow-moving student how to use its weight to tip over crates and block corridors. There was laughter. There was confusion. There were a few bumps and bruises, but there was also a new energy in the room. The students were not just learning techniques. They were learning to think differently. At the end of the class, Kale called them all together. The students were tired but excited. Their eyes were bright with new ideas. You have learned something important today, Kyle said. You have learned that strength comes in many forms. The strength of a Valerian's arm is one form. The strength of a human's mind, that is another. He looked at Ji-hun, Sumin, and Chul. The rule remains. No kill moves in class. But from now on, we will all understand the critical difference between unarmed pacification and improvised salvation. Sometimes the tool that saves a life is not your hand. It is the thing your hand picks up. He dismissed the class. The students filed out, talking animatedly about the new things they had tried. The three humans were the last to leave. As they reached the door, Kale's voice stopped them. A moment, he said. They turned. Kale walked over to them. He stood before Sumin. He seemed taller than ever, but his posture was not threatening. Trainee Sumin, he said. Your question on the first day? It was a good question. It was the right question. I was wrong to dismiss it. Sumin looked up at him. For the first time, a very small, very faint smile touched her lips. Thank you, Trainer Kyle, she said. I am glad it was useful. Kale almost smiled back. Almost. He then looked at all three of them. Do not let this new module make you arrogant. The basics are still important. Discipline is still important. We understand, Ji-hun said. Good, Kyle said. Now go, you have studying to do. All of you, they left the training hall. The corridor outside was busy with students from other classes. No one stared at them anymore. They were just part of the academy. As they walked back to their quarters, Chul shook his head in amazement. I can't believe it. He actually listened. He is a good teacher, Ji-hun said. A good teacher learns from his students. Sumin was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It is more efficient this way. Now everyone will be better prepared. The overall survival probability of the class has increased." Chol laughed. "Only you, Sumin. Only you would think of it like that." She looked at him, her head tilted. "Is it not true?" "It is," Jihun said, smiling. "It is true." They walked on, 3 humans in a school of aliens. They had not changed who they were. They had not become more like the Valerians. Instead, they had helped the Valerians and everyone else become a little more like them. They had taught the galaxy a small piece of the human spirit, the spirit of the survivor, the spirit that always asked, "What can I use?" And in doing so, they had found their place.